Abigail. Very good. My name is Lynne Sachs, and I'm thrilled to welcome Abigail Child today to present our 11th annual experimental lecture. Abigail comes to us after a decade of talks and screenings by Peggy Ahwesh, Craig Baldwin, Bradley Eros, Ernie Gehr, Barbara Hammer, Ken Jacobs, Jonas Mekas, Carolee Schneemann, Serra, and Nick Dorsky. In this series, artists explore their own process, their own investigation of the shift from discouragement to realization. My intention has always been to ask each artist to examine what in their process sends them into a kind of tailspin, a vortex from which they might never escape, but they do. Peggy Ahwesh gave us a woman-centered parler femme. Craig Baldwin flew out from San Francisco for collage essay from compilation film to culture jam. Nick Dorsky also traveled across the country from California to unveil his montage and the human spirit. Bradley Eros created a performative choral experience called Disappearing Soon at a Theater Near You, Ephemeral Cinema and Other Acts of Life. Ernie Gehr simply asked, what is an unfinished work? Barbara Hammer inhabited our theater with her cinema of the optic nerve. Ken Jacobs constructed a cucaracha cinema. Jonas Mekas gave us Jonas Mekas for 4 hours, no notes, just thoughts and revelations. Carolee Schneemann simply asked, again, simply, where did I make the wrong turn? Serra delivered her manifesto, art core, and the explicit body. So this year, I invited Abigail Child to experiment in her own way. For over 4 decades, Abigail's films have shaken our very understanding of the way that images and sounds collapse, explode, and expand in meaning through the wild and transgressive juxtapositions she has invented in her signature style of montage editing. Her celebration of the arts vortex that is the Lower East Side recognizes the daunting quotidian of our urban existence while simultaneously acknowledging the rousing energy of life in her neighborhood. This is seen in her many short, energetic black and white films, and in her longer B-side film, for example, which examines homelessness in the area. Abigail has always given us a nuanced, complicated interpretation of feminism, most recently in Acts and Intermissions, her rousing portrait of Emma Goldman. Abigail's cinematic feminism makes us confront and embrace the messiness and ambiguity of gender in our culture. Personally, I am also extremely moved by her relationship to poetry. Whether we are watching her short films or her full-length experimental documentaries or reading her books of poems, with Abigail Child, we are taken on a ride that will transform us, leave us shaken, alarmed, inquisitive, and oh so very aware. I would like to thank a few people tonight who have been so instrumental in making this program happen. Dan Streible, who has supported this series since its inception, when together we worked with former NYU professor Jonathan Kahana, who recently passed away but was key to the annual lecture. Gratitude to Cinema Studies Chair Anna McCarthy and Undergraduate Film Chair Ezra Sachs for their continued support for the series. Thank you to Cinema Studies staff Christina Kuhulis, Ann Harris, Greg Helmstetter, and tonight's tech supervisor, Karsten Stoiber. At the end of tonight's talk, we will provide some links to Abigail's work in the chat area of the Zoom page for your own further viewing. We will use the Zoom question and answer function once Abigail's talk is complete. I will ask our first questions, then please enter your questions in this designated place for Q&A. on your Zoom page, and then I will read and relay them to Abigail for response. We will not be using the chat function during her talk. Please welcome Abigail Child, who will give us her interpretation of the experimental lecture in her talk entitled, "Where is Your Rupture?"
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Lynne. What a beautiful introduction. And I also want to thank NYU for hosting this and Carson for making it possible technically. I'm sort of honored by that list. I've seen it in print, but to hear it written is fantastic. So thank you. All right, let me start. Where is your rupture? And I start with two quotes. I do not imagine a place of stability. Order interests me only to the extent that it can provide experience. A moment from my childhood to start. Cue the photo, Karsten. In front of an old RCA cabinet that included a record player, a radio, and an 8-inch TV in the living room I was either watching TV or perhaps dancing to music on the Victrola in the open space of our house. In any case, the cabinet was on. And then a sound broke in. SOS, 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 help, water's coming in. The boat's sinking, help. It's an SOS from a boat on the Atlantic Ocean, at least 100 miles east of me, that crosses wires with our TV, phonograph, radio cabinet, and invades our suburban home. Carson, you can take the photo off. It was unforgettable, a moment of transposition. Was it even real? Sound crossing space, it brought the seaside into the suburban hill towns of West Orange, New Jersey. It brought a storm into a sunlit afternoon. It spoke of catastrophe, a technological glitch to rupture the quiet. And through rupture, it revealed both a divide and brought together worlds that were apart in the atmospheric ether. It played as an interruption, a kind of veritable babble of voices, a rupture in the quotidian, an exterior catastrophe announcing itself, blaring, pummeling in on the safe interior of home. In my mind, forever, this is a moment for me of rupture, specifically technological rupture, that I experienced as an 8-year-old. That picture wasn't me. And if I were more sophisticated at that time, I would have perhaps imagined the future of surveillance. Certainly, it felt like an invasion, yet indeed a magical one, an instance of space travel, transfer, impossibilities made current, crossing parietal walls, sound shaping its audition, sound searching out its distant auditors, in an almost classic way of sound searching for help. Through sound and space drifted a notice that there is a rift in surety, in certainty and normality, a drift that meshes reality to the fantastic. In a way, it's a hyperbolic metaphor for my films, for those films that are thriving on rupture, that thrive on a refusal of conventional form, that destabilize the expected. And this is not just an aim in my films, in making my films, though surely it is intentional, and I would argue ethical as well as political, a politics of poetic form, if you will, a politics of cinematic form. In notes I recently found describing my Born For series from the 80s, I write, conceived as a way to bracket my ongoing film investigations in the context of the aggressions of the late 20th century. The title from an etching by Goya, Is This What You Were Born For?, part of his Disasters of War series. The work is in 7 detachable parts, each of which can be viewed by itself for its particular qualities. And the films don't form a single line or even an expanding line, but rather a map of a series of concerns in relation to mind, to how one processes materials, how it gets investigated, how it gets cut apart, how something else inevitably comes up. So not just intent for rupture, but also the process of rupture. Unlike Hitchcock, who speaks of filmmaking as adhering to a script, once he has a script, he says he's done. My work is antithetical to that idea. In fact, if I knew exactly how to arrive at my filmic concepts, I wouldn't have to do the work. The process itself is a discovery, and there are certainly dead ends. If on occasion in my film work, the project can seem as if it's falling apart, it's a mess, it's a mangle of material, I'm forced up against my limits. And I think of Carolee Schneemann whenever I say those words, and have to redefine and remake my construction. I have to find something new, throw it up against the wall, as it were. In a film such as Mutiny from 82 and 83, and I'm going to actually, the first 4 clips that I show will be from films, one film from the 80, one film from the aughts, one film from the 80, one from the aughts, kind of parallel or duets between them. In a film such as Mutiny, I use both the technological glitch caused by the camera itself in the filming and inspiration from the reel of outtakes that result from the editing process. To clarify, Mutiny was shot on a camera much the same as Andy Warhol's camera. It's a camera with a mag trap. It's outmoded then and certainly now. A camera with a magnetic soundtrack on the edge of the film. So in effect, when you were shooting the image, you're also recording the sound. Thus, the sound clicks or blips that you'll hear are in the process of the recording when the camera stopped or was cut. And in some ways, I included that sound, that error, if you will, in the tradition of composers from the 30s and 40s, the noise composers. So I wanted to add that noise. Certainly all of us are influenced by those sound magicians of the early 20th century that moved into the late 20th century, and as you'll see, into the aughts themselves. Regarding the use of outtakes, so one critic recently described all my work as made of outtakes, which I would strongly argue is not true. But when I edit, I put the out shots, the shots I didn't want, and remember this is 16mm film with strips hanging on a bin, I would put them on a reel so that I could look at them periodically and be inspired. And in fact, that's what happened. The chance connections of the editing process itself would kind of point to new directions or new possibilities. And even if they didn't work exactly, they were actually, essential in kind of pushing my ideas a little further, a little, into another unexpected space, a kind of poetic slipstrip combining noise and words with images. And I should add that in Mutiny, the way I listed things on the bin were, someone has asked me that, how did I edit it? I would put nouns, I would put verbs, I would put phrases, and they would be on separate pins on the bin as a way to combine these sounds, this language sound along with exclamations, ooh, ah, yes, no, as a way to make a kind of poetry of movement. In fact, the last words of the film that you're not going to hear in this clip are, "This is called moving." So it's the technological quirks of the production equipment and the purposeful use of outtakes, these kinds of leftovers, these kinds of things that are usually erased, that became kind of both the motif and a motive for making the film. Carson, let's show a clip of Mutiny now. Oh, and I should add for people, they should put their sound very high for this film. It's an early film and the mix is just much lower, even on Vimeo. Thank you.
At the time, voice, and now 20 seconds. This is hard to double, but
It's more than
remember the one. Remember it. Remember and remember.
Do you think Bobby Sachs are that ugly? Who was that?
There's something coming back.
Okay. Um, all right. I should add the name of the film is Mutiny because it was kind of a mutiny against the TV documentary form. And I actually took some images from documentaries that I had directed and edited previously, including the one up in the South Bronx, where you see the guy's neck is being split by a beer can. So it was literally a mutiny. It's also, there's a suburban section that I felt like in suburbia that there was noise everywhere. The toilet paper would make noise when you pulled it. So I was playing with those aspects. Okay, I sometimes feel that in negotiating my material, I'm a puppet master of sorts. It almost happens that at the close to the end of the process, I'm pulling the strings so the mass of collapsed body parts are magically hoisted into living beings. The film itself comes alive. I do use exterior structures on occasion, but I improvise along with that structure. That's part of the structure to be able to break it, part of the rupturing structure. To live in a discontinuous synthesis focused on the body. It falls, it fails again, it fails better per Beckett, a lovely tease, but a serious one, because one might say, that's what is needed to have the film take shape so that it can construct something new, make a cactus, one might say, ideally something that did not exist before, no previous life form, to reference the poet Ron Silliman's aim for his poetry. Out of technological glitch and an insistence on the unexpected, one reenacts the act of cognition and memory. That's kind of important, that the act of cognition and memory is itself not continuous. It's not a synthesis. Dreams and memories come to us in fragments and parts. And in some ways, the films themselves and my process is always trying to reenact that. The world as it is, or this is called moving. Indeed, failure has become a prominent aesthetic. Lynne's emphasis on this, reminding us that our control of technology is an illusion. As the world becomes smooth, artists want to disrupt it, undo, switch the array. We don't want to become the corporate reality. Richard Foreman talks about a rehearsal where he's pleased. It's a week away from opening and everything is working. The next day, the rehearsal falls apart. In frustration, he throws a table into the set, something new, into that small, narrow space he had at the Poetry Project downtown and previously in Soho, for those of us lucky enough to have seen Richard Foreman. 50 feet long and 20 feet wide. Everything then is condensed and everyone had to adjust to this new configuration. To emphasize that the control of technology is an illusion, I'd like to tell an anecdote about a film of mine from the 90s that I'm not going to look at tonight, but I thought its technological breakdown was so interesting that I should speak to it. Shot in 16 millimeter in the early 90s, documenting the homeless of the East Village. It's June and the police, 1991, and the police have refined crowd control and brought in Black helicopters that broadcast to us on the roofs to come on down. Over 200 helmeted riot cops descend in an organized mass against bedrolls and the people inside them. The Dominican church on the corner of Avenue B and 8th Street rings its bells throughout the night in sympathy with the dispossessed. By morning, 50 of the homeless had dispersed, another 50 moved further down the block, and the remaining 50 were across the street between Avenue B and C, settled into abandoned lot that had served the previous spring for a Michael J. Fox and James Woods movie mise en scene, with a truck chase with a gang shooting guns out of the back of the pickup truck. I live on that block, I still do, across the street. And I'd been videotaping successive urban displacements of my neighborhood during that year, now waking up to a world where life copied art in perverse and tragic design. Cue the stills, Karsten. I was sending early versions of B-side back and forth to my colleague. That's me, by the way, with the camera in the East Village. I think it's a very funny picture with our backs to back between the beer woman and myself with the camera. So I was sending early versions of B-side back and forth to my colleague, Nick Dorsky. This was the period of half-inch tape, a non-ideal conclusion to the corporate warfare between beta and half-inch. Since I was reusing the tape, at one point the old version seeped through the newest version, the tapes being recorded on top of each other, which inevitably ran out of sync with the previous version. The image is returned. You can change the photo, Karsten. The image is returned, looped across the recordings in a technological mambo. I pushed these moments to incorporate the repeats into the final 16 millimeter film. This was not, remember, it's not a digital copy. There was no way I could optically print this material at home. Karsten, will you put the other photos up? Yeah, just to get an idea of what the East Village looked like in the 90s. So these images returned, if people can understand it. I'm re-recording half-inch tape and it's falling apart, as is its wont. And the images returned, looped across the recordings in a technological mambo. I had to find shots, multiple takes to bring back the similar images, to remake time through material into magnetic memory imprinted onto the cellulite, or imitating magnetic memory. I know Brakhage has talked despairingly of experimentalism, saying he knew what he was doing. Well, I know what I'm doing as well, but living as a woman, I often feel that I and others are radical aliens in this world, both nationally and globally. The artist and filmmaker Arthur Jaffa speaks of African Americans as both objects and subjects, objects, of course, as slaves, and subjects as people, and the difficulty of becoming a people, a subject. Indeed, I would say women share this duality, share it across the globe, this enforced cultural duality that we, sadly to my mind, incorporate into our own mind's web, such that as a radical alien, I can only be true to myself to contravene the social order, to struggle to maintain a subject position, to undo that position and struggle again. Karsten, you can take the photo off. Not to say I'm a philosophical Hobbesian, i.e. the philosopher that says life is nasty, brutish, and short, but rather that out of the cacophony of a world of signs, one can make something remarkable for its color, rhythm, and dare I say, meaning. I welcome this flux, these destabilizations and disintegrations. They are both my métier, my place of labor, and my milieu, my sense of context, even to the impossibilities or inexpressibilities that can result. Let's look 20 years later into another colorful spread of nonlinear images, Cake and Steak from 2004, and the first film in my Suburban trilogy. Karsten, you can do the clip.
save on former, save on former, save on former, selection of discontinued top quality, sort of continued top quality, sort of discontinued top quality, sort of discontinued.
And his angels all around, his angels all around, his angels all around, his angels all around, his angels all around. And God had his hand and his angels all around, and God angels all around, angels all around, angels all around her, around her, around her. Hell yes, hell yes, hell yes. God had his angels all around, angels all around, angels all around, and God had. Rounder, 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 rounder. Hell yeah, hell yeah, 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 yeah. Rounder, angels all around her. God had his.
Okay. I should add this, that was my first digital edit and on Final Cut, and I was trying out everything I possibly could. And in some cases, I don't even know how I got what I got. But as far as the sound, I can explain that more clearly. At Yaddo in the early aughts, I'm working on a new set of films that become the Suburban Trilogy. I meet up with Joshua Friedman, a composer who had hooked a radio to a keyboard and software. I have my laptop and a free version of Pro Tools. It was that moment in history. And he shows me how to work his system, and I play the machine for a couple of hours, recording directly into my laptop. It becomes generative sound materials that can thread through the film, along with song lines from splintered, broken, damaged LPs of my two older sisters' 78 LP collection, complete with labels from their teenage years. In some ways, you could say I was creating a new tendril of glitch, focusing on disturbed, broken records and creating new sounds through gated software. I love the racked soundtrack here. The hecticness of family life has often overwhelmed me. Perhaps you too. And yet somehow this cacophony tames it. I will not hit the floor, but perhaps I can make music of this cacophony. The variety of noises is infinite. If today, when we have perhaps 1,000 different machines, we can distinguish 1,000 different noises, tomorrow, as new machines multiply, we will be able to distinguish 10, 20, 30,000 different noises, not merely in a simply imitative way, but to combine them according to our imagination. That's Luigi Russolo in 1913, and we've certainly moved into the future. If Cake and Steak was really the first digital editing experience where I felt I could play, I could run through a gamut of ideas enabled by the software. My laptop became a recording studio, and I should note here that I spent time in my youth in recording studios. A partner was a musician and was managed by the same manager of Jimi Hendrix. So we were in studios recording records all the time. I wasn't playing, I was an audience, but I think it's part of where I learned to think about sound and listen to sound and separate sound. And one moment that was really essential to me was listening to a tune written by Jerry Ragavoy, a Philadelphia guy who's dead now, but who previously wrote Take a Piece of My Heart, among others, recorded by the great Janis Joplin. And this new song he had done, I witnessed it being recorded by Stevie Winwood and his band, and then the next day by a group of Black New York City studio musicians. The studio was up on like 44th Street near Times Square. The differences were intense, as if there were two different songs, and it taught me a lot to hear these recording sessions, to hear their differences, their details, the way different people can strike a different tune. Downtown musicians and poets have always been close to my work, fans of my work from the very beginning, for which I've been immensely grateful and inspired by. My ontological impurity, if you will, matches their rebellious spirit. I like to use sound to undermine sentiment, reframing by repeating gestures, processing, and the gating of the contemporary radio and 50s music to suggest alternative stories. I'm always amazed because the radio sounds in Cake and Steak sound sort of old-fashioned, but they're actually fairly contemporary. It's as if advertising culture has not quite advanced. But as well, what I really love about home movies is the complex emotions that lurk spectacularly within them. And what better place to find emotions and a landscape of an era, an ethnography of an era, than in home movies. Their subjects greet the camera and smile in familial recognition, sometimes hysterical and sometimes touristic. My next pair of movies is going to be Covert Action from the 80s and The Future is Behind You from the aughts. For Covert Action, I had very limited materials. In fact, they were leftover materials. It does seem like that's what I end up with. From over 3 hours of archive footage advertised at the Collective for Living Cinema in downtown New York in the 80s, a colleague got there first. And by the time I got there, there was about 1,000 feet left, close to a half hour approximately. I looped some of it and began to edit the remainder. Previously, couple years earlier, I had shot poets on the rooftop in the Bay Area, but it was very early morning, like 7 o'clock before they were at work, and it was a kind of failure. The sky was gray, the air was polluted, the shoot difficult. I was negotiating 2 actors trying to film and record at the same time in 16 millimeter alone. In the end, I threw away the image completely and kept the conversation between Carla Harriman and Steve Benson as voiceover for Covert Action. These two, Carla and Steve, are amazing poets and performers, and they work this conversation into a kind of ping pong of digression. I kept their conversation, editing it severely, indeed, but yet with their brilliance at the fore, placing their voiceover over black and white home movies of 2 couples on vacation that I imagined, well, the women were changing as the men remained the same. I wasn't imagining that, but it was kind of a debauchery, a weekend or a series of weekends of debauchery, a set of scenarios of gender. I use the idea of a spiral as a structuring device. I kind of like abstract structural ideas, running out of material and moving forward with new material to seep in. We can see here the precursor of Cake and Steak, the asynchronous chapters, the missing chapters. And also, if I'm totally truthful, I will have to say I was definitely inspired by Bruce Conner's report, Reconstructing Time Out of Another Time. Let's look at Covert Action.
Okay, now
So you were talking about
the series of previous.
in fact,
It's exactly.
actually, I was saying it.
Their bodies were completely automatically political.
Around a little. Not a little.
I don't know. Let's see. I've been thinking
Interact with it.
in front of my face. No.
Well, yes.
He assumes knowledge he doesn't even know.
It could be that I've just got my head in the clouds and I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense? Can you imagine?
I'm not going to
That's real life.
Oh, no. Oh, yes. This urgent display of
Symbiosis about them. Yeah, they were completely
exactly in the way
that were constantly correcting their bodies. Last
I
thing
don't
when you go to
like to
bed.
do that. If you look at me,
We were going
I know the things that I don't
I know. But now I have to pause.
He stepped out. I'm hoping to see you moving.
I felt that I was in a kind of improbable body.
In this particular photograph.
What is she looking at?
No voices. No voices.
Now look.
Then what? This.
I think it was totally awkward.
Yes.
Well, totally awkward, indeed. Television culture merged with structural film from the 70s, conjoined with the lively poetry scene of late 70s San Francisco, influenced my convictions about a politics of form, i.e. that form speaks, has its own subtext, and to only talk about radical issues in a normalized way would or could do nothing to change consciousness, couldn't even poke at the culture. We so easily vandalize our most radical thoughts and constructions. Usually my films center around the body, the female body. The Future is Behind You continues that exploration. I was thinking of the quote in Covert Action, constantly correcting their bodies, how women embody their own critical societal culture in their presentation, in their self mode. 2 decades later than Covert Action, Future is Behind You is also a black and white home movie that energizes my imagination and steals the scene. It's the second film of the series on suburbia, the Suburban Trilogy. And when I first saw the footage, I was thinking that the film should mark immigration and point to some of the ways, the whys of when people come to America. Because for me, suburbia is the ultimate American trip. It's the trip where you lose your ethnicity, you become American. Maybe you only keep your ethnicity in terms of food, but basically you're living in this quote unquote American dream. So I thought the film is also a precursor. It goes back to the 30s instead of post World War II and Cake and Steak, and actually with Surf and Turf into the aughts. So I use text and title cards to reference the real that's happening at the same time, to weave within it imaginary dialogues, to create a provocative and contemporary comparison and narrative. A student asked me, I mean, you haven't seen the film yet, but the student asked me recently, why did I make the people Jewish? And I thought that a very strange, if interesting question. The found footage itself came in these boxes. Let's see, can you see them? There you can. I'm sorry for this background. Let's see, there. And they were old Kodak from 1930 to 1938. And what had always interested me in home movies, in any case, is what's left out. It's what's left out in the family scene, in the backyard. Maybe everybody was arguing, maybe everybody was laughing, but all you see is the presentation to the camera. And it usually is a very avowed presentation. And what's also left out is what's happening in the world outside the home movie. The backyard is a small space. The family is a small space, and how they erase the history that's roiling around us. So those two excisions, if you will, of home movies really intrigued me. So that's another reason why I put the story on that I did, of course. And the last thing that really intrigued me in this particular footage was were the women themselves, the young girls, who in the beginning you see as tomboys and active, and by the end of the film, they've become brides and shy and embarrassed. And that kind of gendering of women that happens over time, the kind of cultural decrees that we absorb, that I was interested in looking at. It's always absorbing, and even as it's a reflection of a reality that can sadden me. So my response to this is both the real material and its beauty, actually, and the imaginative backstory. Let's look at The Future is Behind You for about 3.5 minutes.
etwas schön?
Na, pass auf, Bruder. Ja, bist du jetzt? Nein, was soll man machen? Ja, mach mal.
Trinkt man schönen Tee, aber du beißt den Zucker nicht dazu. Ich würde das immer.
Ein Zucker.
Great. Okay. So now you've been introduced to two parts of the Suburban Trilogy, Cake and Steak and Futures Behind You. I hope you get to see all the films in their totality. I need to say, probably, I find clips an odd way to negotiate my work. It's already in parts or fragments or slivers, although I dislike that description, and would rather consider it a new grammar of phrasing, words, notes, exclamations, a syntax, then, for which its fullest sentence would be found with the third film, Surf and Turf, to complete the trilogy, an ethnography of girlhood and suburbia, a prismatic ricochet. That said, I'll also say at the end, I'll give you some links where you could actually see some films in their completion, which might be valuable. Moving closer to the present, let me move to the end with two more recent films that repeat and expand some of these strategies and ideas. In Acts and Intermissions, which Lynne spoke about, which is Emma Goldman in America, Emma Goldman in Anarchism, body and politics conjoined specifically. Here is another trilogy, one of women and ideology, failed ideologies. The first is on Mary Shelley and Romanticism in the 19th century, entitled Unbound and shot in Italy. Moving westward, the next is Acts and Intermissions with Emma Goldman and Anarchism in the 20th century, shot in New York City. And moving westward still to Japan for Origin of the Species, my film on androids set in the context of the ideology of science in the 21st century. And my idea here was that somehow ideology fails women. Perhaps perhaps it fails all of us. Its purity is a kind of sacrifice to reality, perhaps, so that when we grasp onto ideologies, we're kind of ignoring all the ambiguities and the contradictions that real life actuality is. With Acts and exploring the life of Emma Goldman, I'm also comparing and ultimately recontextualizing the resurgence of protest in the 21st century. At one point, someone who's writing about this film said, can you list all the protests? And I realized there's protests from the 20s, from the 30s, and then, Occupy and climate change and the Women's March, the Gardener, the Black Lives Matter. We've really been in the last decade, definitely in a time of protest, perhaps a time that needed to protest. And like Emma Goldman, I want to speak with my time. And I should add here that for me, in fact, and I think for all of us, history is part of our time. Not only is the future behind you, history is where we're going. We're making history, but we're also living it, and we're also living out its constraints, its tendrils, its nodules, its nerve endings. And if you look at the last few years, you really, I think, can experience it viscerally. With Acts, the footage is thus of the moment as well as historical archive. A punk Emma Goldman, she acts Emma Goldman is Miriam Rorschach, who plays the physical Emma, while another woman, Alenka Kreger, speaks her voice. The body then becomes a shifting container with which to expose the continuing conflicts between labor and property, revolutionary purity, and personal freedom or desire. When I started the project, I have to say honestly, I wasn't as fully aware that the issues Emma faced in 1917 were very often the same ones we were facing in 2017. Women's rights, labor rights, immigration rights, and free speech, and the right to protest. The film performs this time travel, intercutting moments from Emma's life with her prescient speeches, weaving industrial era factory labor with computer data centers, with Emma's intimate diaries to explore human vulnerabilities, compromises, and choices. Known as the most dangerous woman alive, Emma was also passionate and sexual. Beauty and art, humor were part of the freedoms for which she was fighting. She felt all of us deserve that. The film creates a dialogue then on individual liberties and anarchism, how we risk and how we are compromised, questions that have become only more relevant in our current political climate. Let's play two selections from Acts and Intermissions. The first is just the very beginning, and the second goes into it. Kirsten.
impossible to fully live the life of an anarchist in present conditions.
Carson, you can put the second take up, the second cut.
Want freedom, the right to self-expression. Everybody's right to beautiful, radiant things. Johann encourages me to speak to the workers. I do so in Yiddish. It is intoxicating.
Hi, guys. Um, I should say Zoom is certainly not the best way to look at a film. That black bar falling on the beginning cut does not belong there. I don't know what was happening. It's the interface. We're in the technological glitch in the rupture world. Okay, in that last section, the violence is accompanied by opera sound. And what I'm trying to counterpoint is the jealousy and pleasure that Emma was taking in attending theater is counterpointed to her doubts about should she indeed be doing that while the workers were suffering. And there's a growl of loops and in that opening take that were inspired by the weaving machines and the sound of work, courtesy of the contemporary composer Andrea Parkins. So there's both voiceover and text commentary, and the two interweave to make a complex of thought and movement, sometimes in contradiction with each other, sometimes an exterior and an interior voice, what one sees and what one is, as Atel Aden, a painter and poet, just described herself, that she's a visual artist in what she is, and she's a poet in what she sees. I thought that was a really interesting way to think about how we go about the world. Again, discontinuous assemblage to suggest not a sealed past, but a present moment animated by the same injustices that Goldman is sought to abolish. So you'll see in the early covert action and even in Futures Behind You, the weave of voice, sound, and text image, a way to reimagine the interior and exterior of being. I'm circling around here to the present. And a funny thing happened on the way to this lecture. Where is Your Rupture became, in the New York University production office design of the poster, Where is Your Rapture? Cue the photo. Let's see the photo. Guess I have to go off. Well, let's see. We're looking for the photo. Great, thanks. No, it should be Where is Your Rapture? That was the photo I sent you. All right. The wrong photo. All right. That wasn't the right photo. The original poster said, Where is Your Rapture? Which I thought extremely funny in the context of my lecture. Another kind of error and a desire in my work, in a way, to run from a desire, not in my work, but a desire of human beings to run from rupture, from the challenge of rupture, and rather to be taken up, the antithesis of what I've been describing in a way. And yet the slippage is strangely reflective. We all want rapture, to be taken up literally, to be embraced, to be in pleasure, in desire, to be enraptured. Years ago, I wrote that I didn't want to give you what you want. And I don't think I was so wrong. I think we need to keep thinking, jumping in our seats, particularly when the world's idea of beauty, there it is so often soporific and commodified. Thank you, Kirsten. You can take it off now. I think people get it. Yet I also think, I want to add that I think interruptions and glitches are beautiful, can give the ear and eye pleasure through color, rhythm, and mad thought. That perhaps even as rupture gets mistaken as rapture, perhaps they are closer than we think, or than I thought even, that both enact a time out of time, that perhaps allows the day in its realness, but not in its advertisement, not in its commodification. Let us end with my latest, a clip from my latest Blue Edit, because if after Mayhem, when I made Mayhem in the 80s, that's the name of a film of mine, I made Mercy, after watching the violence of acts and intermissions, let us move to Blue Edit, a kind of meditation, a meditation of goodbyes, a meditation of passage, of human time moving inside the indifference of global natural time, inside the indifference of nature. This was completed during COVID. In fact, I had started it the year before, but it was the spring of 2020 that enabled me to come back to this footage and have it find its form. So let's look at a little bit over 2 minutes of Blue Movie.
I can't stand the rain against my window.
Intermediate, advanced, expert, and extreme. Which one is it? Yeah. How about expert? Well, expert involves a lot of slugging and stomping and eye gouging and guys throwing or maybe. Well, that's for tourists mostly. I mean, just yelling and cursing.
Bringing back sweet memories.
Okay. A blue movie, a meditation, yes, a collection, fragments, partial time, shot on iPhone 6 and iPhone 8, remainders, much like memories, partial, coming back. I'm reminded of Lynne Hygenian's writing is an aid to memory, surely cinema is as well. Here, without the narrative line, without fixture, without a leg to stand on, but rather defined in rhythm, the double take, the otherness of digression and interruption. So you and I have to think every moment about the role we are playing, the time we exist in, a state of rupture, inside hopefully a matrix of interrogation. So what remains within this ambiguity, within this rupture? Not only an image, a copy, an illusion through technology, as I am speaking to you here, but just as much a part of the real. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abigail. That was marvelous and so thought-provoking. And I'm just going to reiterate what our plan is now. People can send in questions and then I'll be reading them to Abigail. She'll also be able to read them herself. I'll start with a question in just a minute, but I also wanted to say that, yes, this experimental lecture by Abigail Child has been recorded and it will be available on the Cinema Studies website. But I also have all the recorded lectures. Sometimes we weren't able to record them, but most of them have been recorded and they're on my website. And if you just type experimental lecture, they're there. So if you want to hear other people's explorations of this concept, they're there for you. So Abigail, I wanted to ask you if you are convinced that culture has failed us. And if culture has failed us, why is it that you offer culture back to us as an answer to that? One reason this comes to my mind is that you have chosen to embrace both experimental film, if we're going to call that, and poetry, each of which are confrontations with mainstream culture. They ask us to break up the grammar of communication. And I wanted to ask you if you could talk about your shift back and forth between film and poetry and how both of them give you the tools or the armor to address the, call it, foibles of the culture that you have witnessed.
Well, that's a lot of questions there. Has culture failed us? Sure. I mean, as women, particularly globally, culture is a mess for women. But I don't know if I mean, how can I say this? So culture's failed, but I think in my films, I remake the world the way I would like to see it. So it's like I I remake history, like some of the films you haven't seen, of course, but Perils, which is based on strongman movies from the 30s and imitates silent movies. It's like I'm playing with it. I'm making it humorous. For me, for me, I was laughing through some of this. I think it's very funny. It may be dark, it may be arresting, it may be confrontational, people use as a word, but for me, it's also like jazz. It's like music. It's a technological mambo. Come on, it's like you can dance to it. So that for me is what I'm doing. What was the second part of your question?
I wanted to talk a little bit about your
poetry.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm a reader. I've always been a reader. What do they say as an artist? If you have a notebook, you'll never be lonely. I think as a book, I would never be lonely. I could be anywhere, but if I had something to read that I was absorbed in, I was happy. And I think being a reader is great preparation for being a writer. And I began to write, very, in my 20s. But I was very lucky. And so at a very down moment in my life, I was writing, and it was sappy. It wasn't great work, but it got me to read poetry, and I returned to poetry, because although I'd read some poetry in college, of course, and on my own, I wasn't a huge poetry reader until this moment of downbeat moment in my life. And I read everything that, in 3 months. I went from, Diane of contemporary poetry, Diane Wachowski to Louis Zukofsky. And although they're both at the end of the alphabet there, but Zukofsky, finding his short poems, all the short poems in 8th Street bookstore at the time, St. Mark's. I just opened it and I said, I would like to write like this. This is speaking to me completely and absolutely. And so I was just very lucky. I was writing, it was, whatever, but I went to San Francisco I had been robbed of everything in my house in the East Village, except my camera, which was in repair shop. I was robbed of the TV, my computer, the Victrola, all my jewelry, everything was gone. And they came back twice and left a knife on the sofa. It was kind of scary at that point. So I left town, and I left with my camera and a suitcase, and I didn't come back for 6 years. And luckily I went to Naropa and then San Francisco, and there was poetry. It was the only class I took with Diana DePrima at Naropa, and it wasn't good for me, but the experience at Naropa was fantastic. And then so wonderfully, a friend I met at Naropa moved in with Ron Silliman in the last hippie heaven in Pacific Heights in San Francisco, if any of you know San Francisco. And he introduced me to this huge poetry scene that was happening. And I was very responsive. It was it's kind of a crazy thing to say, but I'll say it because it's true for me. They were the smartest people I'd ever met. They were thinking all the time, and it matched where I was in my inner life. And they were challenged to me as well. What they read, what they pushed me to. We went in a theory group, and anyway, it was a very exciting moment in my life. And so I was doing film, and then I was writing, and they were feeding each other in terms of structure, in terms of how to think about the world. And then of course, lately using text, and I have a whole subtitled series where I purposefully put text into the piece. It's part of the basis. I didn't show you all of that. Some of them are behind me actually right now. Mirror World in the middle, but and also actually the one on the left, the one on the right and left. So it becomes natural. Sometimes I will be doing more film, I'll be editing, and I won't be writing, but I'm always writing almost every day in a notebook or diary or lists. And I haven't succeeded yet, but I'm always trying to include everything in the writing. But what was I going to say about writing and film is sometimes writing feels more intimate, and sometimes film seems, I don't know, more, it's less intimate perhaps, but sometimes it touches the inexpressible. which I aim to do in poetry, but maybe it's a little easier in film. I don't know.
So I'm going to read a question from Anna McCarthy to you.
Okay.
Thanks for sharing your wonderful work. I really like the way your grammar counterpoints image and sound. Can you say something about how you use sound and particularly speech, the word, in your process? For example, in Mayhem, there's a moment where the subtitles say no, and the voice on the soundtrack says yes, which seems linked to the asynchrony of voice and performance in acts and intermissions.
Yeah, it's the asynchrony, it's the yes and the no, and it's the unexpected, and it's trying to get away. I use sound as a way to demolish the sentimentality of home movies, the sentimentality of family. Although I love Victor Shklovsky, who's a Russian writer, who says, of course I'm sentimental, I'm human. So that's also present. So yeah, I feel like the words can, I'm in, you know, it's my mind. My mind is always getting a cross current of visual ears and meaning. And so I want to get that into the movies. You know, I want to make it dense. Now, maybe it comes out of originally editing and seeing the film again and again and again and wanting to keep it new. But it's also, it's the density makes it feel alive. I mean, think about it. Mutiny is almost 40 years old. And to me, it feels very fresh. It was panned when it came out severely, but it's now become quote unquote a classic. And I say that with mixed emotions. It's lovely to be ahead of your time, but it's also a pain in the ass. You know, one would, you know, would prefer not to have to wait. So I don't know if that, you know, there's much more to say about language and image and how you can work it and how you can play it. And I think as far as sound, when I started editing seriously in the late 70s, I think I felt sound was an area that had been undiscovered. You know, only a few people, Coppola, of course, and a few people, Godard, work with sound in interesting ways. And so for me, it was an open field. And I thought, that's a place I can go.
So I want to encourage other people to bring, to offer some of their questions. I'll ask you another question about sort of challenges along the road. You mentioned Richard Foreman, and you talked about like sort of the notion of a Foreman-esque table, that you just when you think things are perfect, an obstacle is thrown in, or you throw an obstacle in yourself. Maybe it comes from the exterior world, maybe it comes from your own dilemma in the so-called creative process. Could you give us some kind of maybe incidents in your life where you were working on a project and then you had a forced detour that maybe gave you some kind of realization or better understanding of how to kind of accept these?
Well, one of the things is B-side. I actually had a whole script for B-side. And when I looked at the footage, it didn't work. It just didn't have life. You know, it's very hard I think for experimental filmmakers to do narrative. It's like, I'm not sure we have the total sense of it. But so it failed. It wasn't working. And I had to pull up stakes and come up with a completely different structure for the piece. I had to get rid of all the dialogue, all the narrative, and just think about gesture. And I had always intended to put, you know, archival footage in because I was living in the middle of it. You know, if you see B-side, it's really what's amazing. We're a mile or two from Wall Street, and it was like a third world country in the East Village, and not the Lower East Side, the East Village. It was like I have film of Avenue C where there's markets on the street and the kids are looking at a gun. You know, an 8-year-old black kid picks up a gun, and meanwhile, right around the corner, there was just, you know, people were making homes that really looked like the Dominican Republic, people were often from the Dominican Republic more than anything else. There were entire blocks that were rubble that'd been dynamited. And then the irony of it all, it would be like then there'd be a Hollywood movie that would be shot in the rubble to imitate gangs in the ghetto, quote unquote. And my friends lived on 10th Street and they stayed up all night to watch when they dynamited the cardboard tenements that this film built to dynamite. So, you know, the irony of it, I was living across, we had moved into a city building, and if you see B-side, it opens with the lot across the way being moved in by the homeless. But the building,
I remember that.
Yeah. And the building across the way that is now also a city building was moved into, was used as, and it was a rubble, it wasn't rubble, but it was graffitied and with AIDS and a bunch of signage, and people were using it for fashion shoots. Like you'd see people show up and then it would be in the New York Times Sunday Fashion Center. So the irony of sort of living in rubble. So maybe that also addresses culture and how do you remake culture so it more mimes both the actuality and maybe your imagination. But anyway, so B-side was like a huge failure for at least a year, and then we turned around. And I had to go back and shoot more. I had shot a lot of it, and then I had to go back and shoot more with a new idea of it. What else was like that? The ones that were the hardest to make, where they were going in one direction and then they switched. Another one might be Unbound, which we didn't even talk about, which is the life of Mary Shelley. And I've done a cut of it under The Shape of Error, talk about The Shape of Error. But at one point, I couldn't bear the chronology of it. And this was another accident, a technological accident. I realized doing this lecture, something I hadn't realized about my work, is that it's very influenced by the technology itself, the materiality and how you play. And I remember at my school where I was teaching, students were saying, oh, let the grad students teach everybody the tech. And I was like, no, you want to be able to shape it. You want to be able to feel it. You want to be able to hack even software, not just 16 millimeter. So I hadn't realized that I was quite that influenced by it, but I definitely have been. And in Unbound, what had happened was at one point I thought I could just move it from the 16 millimeter format to a widescreen format. I think that was the issue. I'm sort of forgetting it now. It's been a while. And I plugged it in and I just hit a button. And the whole thing went completely haywire. And I couldn't use the haywire, but it was inspiring. And so then I went back to the original film and I tried to like reshape it in the shape of the haywire. And so that's another very difficult film that got changed midway.
So we have a question now from Lynne Heft, who says, thank you, my dear friend, for a wonderful lecture. Even though we have just seen clips, I would like to know your reasoning for the presentation of fast-paced imagery in your work with little slowed or stopped action. You probably get questions like that a lot because of your rhythms.
Well, actually, Blue Edit is probably my slowest film, but I think as a result of Zoom, at least for me, it was kind of clipped a little bit, it was being clipped a little bit and softened. I don't know why, maybe the length of the presentation has weakened it, or maybe just for me. So I think if you saw it in a theater and you saw the whole thing, it would be fast, but it would be, it would have a structure, it would have a shape, it would have a beginning and a middle and an end, and you would feel it. Like I said, my mind goes that way, so it doesn't even seem that fast to me. I mean, the early ones maybe, but the later ones, no. And there is some pauses in my film. Covert Action has a point where the hula dancer comes in and she's the longest scene. And in it, I'm cutting Cobra Woman in with very speedy, well, very rock and roll sounds. And so I was, again, cutting the softness of the image of the hula dancer. You can't see all my hands. And with a sound that cuts it. So why? Because it's beautiful, because it entertains me, because it keeps you alert. Maybe it pushes you away, but if you can stay with, it's like, do you like jazz? You know, if you hate jazz, you might hate my work. Nothing I can do about that. But I will also say it's true. Sometimes you want to listen at night to something different. And so it depends on the time of day and where your head is. Could I have even picked slow moving work? I don't think so. I'm trying to think what I thought Futures Behind You is as slow as it gets. And then I showed it to my 94-year-old mom a couple months before she died, and I realized it wasn't so slow. What can I say? You know, things are relative. Maybe I should say this is when I taught at Mass College of Art one time, I had a student who'd been in the military, and he'd come back and he did a piece, and I couldn't see the structure. It just looked like a mass. And he said, no, it's structured. And it was a moment when I realized that everybody's chaos is different. You know, what you can, you know, if you have a teenage son, maybe you know that already from their room. But it's like what I think is chaos, what I think is fast, what I can handle is going to be different than anybody else. And it was a good thing to learn that everybody's inner speed is really different. That's all
I also wanted to say in watching your films that I think it's our responsibility to shift our body's relationship to the imagery and to look at it as a gestalt and almost like to look at the bounce between the images instead of the images as singular events. So then it becomes a fabric. So I'm going to read a couple of more questions to you. From Camila. Recently, my 5-year-old son, who still can't read, watched Salome and Mirror World with me. I didn't translate anything, but he was very interested in the rhythm of the film, in the dance of the characters, the scenes. I know you have a relation to dance and dancers, and I would like to know how dance and dancers influence your work.
Great. Hi, Camilla. Yeah, well, I've always moved. You know, I got in trouble in school for being restless and moving too much. But I was later told my spine is a little bit curved, and if I wasn't moving so much, I would have back pain. So I thought my interior body was right. But then I danced a little bit as a kid, but not really. But where I did was in my 20s in New York. I volunteered for Bob Wilson's Life and Times of Joseph Stalin, I guess it was called. It was the 12-hour opera in the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And I was a yellow lady and I was a peacock, I guess. I don't know, a llama, I don't know. We had masks on and did kind of a circle dance. But then I started to take classes with Meredith Monk. I took one class with Trisha Brown. I took some classes with Elaine Summers. These are all Judson School people, and Simone Forti. So I was interested in the avant-garde. My mind goes that way, I guess. And they, you know, it was about the body and it was about really interesting ways to come up with a translated dance form instead of Be a Wind, which is what I was introduced to as an 8-year-old. It was more like 3 people make a line, and it was a great moment. It was one of these improvisations that should have been in somebody's performance, because what happened is the girl in the middle was moving and the 2 of us kept moving to make a line that would change. So it became this enforced dance by that instruction. So it was so brilliant, this idea of translations of something else that could be into movement. So that's where dance has influenced me. And of course, some of my colleagues are, you know, those were people older than me that I studied with, but some of my friends, Sally Silvers is a dancer. In Mutiny, she actually appears in the NYU office, by the way, because I was teaching at NYU in the early 80s, their Film 1 class, and somehow they let us in the office and we were filming, and of course nobody was paying any attention to her after 5 minutes. It was kind of funny. So yeah, and also just bodies, you know, if you're looking at bodies, you know, New York City streets are a dance. You know, there's always something interesting. You know, when I go out of state in the country for the summer, say, and when I come back, I'm always delighted with the different faces and costumes and hair color and the way people in New York are always performing. So that's influenced me too. And in fact, the Born Force series was a return from San Francisco to New York. And some of its wildness, some of its speed is because I was being descended into this maelstrom of activity of New York. And I feel that now after COVID, you know, when I'm crossing the street, just today I was saying, God, there's so many people out and they're all wandering back and forth. It was, you know, it was quite a lot of energy.
And choreography in a way.
Choreography, of course, yes.
I have one more question, and then I also wanted to remind people that Abigail will be posting in the chat.
No, I'm trying to. Can I interrupt you for a second? I put it in everyone, but it's not going up. How do I make it go up into it? Do I hit the paper or the smile?
If you just post it, then I can cut and paste it, and I'll try to.
Should I just post it to you then? Maybe?
That's fine.
Yeah. All right, let's see. I've tried to post it, but I don't know if it went. Oh, it did.
We got it. We got it. So
I'll do it to everyone then right now. That works.
Then we have one more question, because I know people are going to want to see the films in their entirety, and it's great that you're making those available.
And I would say on Penn Sound, there are 4 free complete films. On the VOD, courtesy of Filmmakers Co-op, there's many more. You have to pay a very little bit. And then what I also listed was a book. This is called Moving, A Critical Poetics of Film. I will turn off my preferences for a minute because you won't see it otherwise. I will turn off my backdrop. Hold on. Okay, so now there's no backdrop. That nobody asked me about the backdrop. I'll tell you in a minute. So this is called Moving, and I don't know if you're reading it backwards or forwards.
No, we're reading it. It's fine. We're reading it.
And it's available. I don't know if it's available at your local bookshop, but you can ask to order it. It used to be available on Amazon. I'm not sure it is anymore. And then there's also, for all of you who teach and get your school to buy, this is a monograph in both French. Well, there's a French publication of it, but also in English. And it comes with, should come, let's see if it's there, with a DVD of, oh, I don't see it here. Oh, yeah, it is. A DVD of Born For. And you have to pay a bunch of money for it, but it's really worth it. It's a beautiful book with essays by Tom Gunning, Melissa Ragona, and the poet Riddell Olson. So it talks about my poetry, my sound, and Gunning's article is great, The Pulse of the Last Machine. Wonderful title. And then I just wanted, this just came out, so I'm going to PR it. This is by a friend of mine, who I have never even met, Rachel Garfield, and it's experimental filmmaking in punk. And it's a lot about my work, included with Vivian Dick and any number of people, Ruth Novacek, Leslie Thornton, a little bit Peggy Ahwesh, bunches of people, my colleagues who I respect. And I love that Rachel put me into the punk, because, you know, you ask about the speed, and punk is part of a rebellion, a rejection of the normative, a rejection of women as sentimental sorts. And I think she really understands the work well, as does Tom Gunning for sure. I think that's it.
So we had one final question, and then we'll have to say goodbye. So thanks so much. You use historical figures associated with anarchism, Emma Goldman, Mary Shelley. Have you been influenced by anarchism in ways other than these characters?
Well, just my sense of rebellion and my sense of, I probably have difficulty with rules. I think many of us do. On the other hand, we're in an era, you know, I don't want to, I mean, Emma didn't even vote. She felt voting would, you know, support the culture that is. But I think right now, in the time we're in, you better all vote. Vote, make your voices heard, take place, be an activist. And actually, I should talk about my new film for a second. I'm working now on a film shot in Nova Scotia, where I've summered many summers during my school teaching time. And I'm going to emphasize both climate and sociological change, because it's happening and COVID has only speeded it up. And in one of the, there was, what was so great about doing these, I'm hoping not to have any talking heads, but to make it a sound mesh across the images. And one of the people I interviewed for it was a young man was very optimistic about what you could do with the shoreline and how you could preserve. He was a geologist. And the other person was a biologist who studies beetles. And he had such an optimistic sense at the end. He said, really, it's going to be up to the young people to protest, to march, as they did in the Vietnam War. That is the only thing that is going to actually make a difference with climate change, that will enforce the government to make the changes that are needed. And it was so, I had not really thought of that period, which is of course a period in my life, my university life, of going to civil rights protests, of going to anti-war protests. And, you know, I was thinking, I've been to anti-nuclear, you know, climate change protests. We've all been to so many protests. And I do think that climate change is going to need a mass of people going out. So when I think of anarchism, I think, yes, rebellion is important, but it's also really important to address the politics of our era. I think in the last number of years, we've seen how fragile democracy is, which, to be honest, I had never realized quite as completely. We've been living in a bit of a dream world, the rapture that we love, and it will all be ruptured if we don't fight a little bit to save it.
Really appreciate those encouraging words, and I appreciate people coming to this experimental lecture every year, once a year. Maybe we'll be in person next year, but we probably will include Zoom as well, because this has allowed us to bring people from all over the world, which I find very inclusive and important. So Abigail, thank you enormously. And Karsten, our technician, do you want to add anything more?
Just one thing. Were you able to send my things that I sent?
I did send it to everyone.
Because I don't see it in the chat.
It does say that it went to everyone, but somebody also said that I mean, you can scroll down. I think it just went to everyone. So if we're not able to do it, I think we have a list of all the participants who've been included, so we could send that out later. Okay. But I did include it here, and we can put it on the, you know what we'll do also, Abigail? We'll put it on the NYU website page, all of these links. So then people can go to the same page they went to register. So it'll be available, because some people might not have a chance to copy and paste this text. So we'll add this to the New York University page. I just want to thank everybody for joining us. It was a big event and really a great celebration of your work. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, let's see, 18 new messages.
So people can cut and paste from the chat. I believe it's there now.
Yeah, I don't think anybody got that stuff. That was the problem, the chat. It didn't work for anybody. I don't know why my chat.
We have actually a lot of people participating in the chat here.
No, but what I sent, nobody got.
Oh, I sent it again.
Okay, yeah, because they just said they did.
Okay, let me see. There.
Thank you.
There we go. There it is. So I sent it anyway. We will add it to the NYU webpage where people registered, and I've sent it now a couple of times. So I think to everyone. It says me to everyone. Do you see it at the very last at 8:42?
Just at the end. Yep, it finally. Yeah. Oh, still not there. I think it is there.
Oh, lots of now we're getting lots of chat notes. Oops. Yep. Still not there. There it is. I was told by Anna McCarthy. There it is. So we got it. So everybody, if you scroll up to LS, that's my initials. You'll see a list of Abigail's film, and we're going to stay on for a few more minutes. There's still 45 people here, and you can cut and paste those links and then go enjoy Abigail's work.
Thank you, guys.
I'll do it one more time. There we go. One more time.
Thanks, everyone. It's sort of hard that I don't see your faces, your smiling faces.
It's really true. But they're piping in.
Mhm.
Still quite a few people writing in.